Friday here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're going to start off talking about the big news of the week, and that was Cam Sutton's return to the Pittsburgh Steelers. What all happened to get him back to the Steelers? What all led to him being cut from the Lions? And how does he fit in with the Steelers now? That and the question is, what is Minkah Ball, according to Minkah Fitzpatrick? All here and more on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko, one of our great Steelers beat writers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of the daily content that comes out from all of our Pittsburgh Post-Gazette sports writers throughout the week, as well as the Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast. And as always, the show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, it's on the North Shore, right across the street from PNC Park on Federal Street. You go there, you can sit outside and look at the amazing Pittsburgh skyline. You can also sit inside and watch any of their 20 televisions that have any sporting events on, and they have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. It's the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. More on them later. Brian, big news happened Wednesday. I know that, Thursday has its own OTAs and everything, but I think the biggest thing was, Cam Hayward showed up Tuesday and we were all like, oh, that's pretty big news. And then the Steelers signed a different Cameron, and that was Cam Sutton.
Big week for Cams.
Big week for Cams. A huge week indeed. But Brian, this does not, whereas there's fanfare and there's a lot of Steelers fans like, oh, wow, the guy that everyone was upset that the team didn't re-sign last year is back. So that should be great. But the incident that led him and the case that has led him to being cut by the Detroit Lions in the first place is not exactly in the rearview mirror. He's still in the pretrial diversion program from that case. It looks like he will avoid a conviction on the case, but maybe not an NFL punishment. What's your readout on just the status and how this is all played out for Cam Sutton to return to the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, the court of public opinion here is going to be different from the league discipline and different from the actual courts. So, right. I mean, it's all that really matters, I suppose, to the Steelers at this point is how much time he's going to end up missing when the league rules on this. But I think to the outside world, there's a lot more to it than that. And Wednesday was significant because, it did give them a chance to actually have Cam Sutton address it for the first time publicly, answer questions about it from reporters. He, sort of tried to preface everything by saying he knows there are going to be questions about what's happening with him outside of football, but he wanted to stick to just being back here. And yet, there inevitably were more questions to him about what his message would be to not just Pittsburgh fans, but Lions fans who, he was on their team not long ago, and they moved on from him quickly. So I think that's also an aspect of this that puts the Steelers in a little bit of a awkward spot, because you've got one of the other 31 teams who said, nope, everything that's adding up here for us in this grant, albeit in an early phase of it, we're not going to continue to do business with this guy. We're done. Zero tolerance, basically. Now the Steelers are the ones who are going to take this chance on him for, let's be honest, a pretty good player relative to the vet minimum contract that he's going to play under. So, yeah, I mean, these things are tricky. I always just kind of go into them with a lot of things can be true. It can be true that the Steelers know Cam Sutton very well from having him here 6 years, and he was always an upstanding member of the team, never caused any drama or distractions, and if anything, was actually a great leader by the time he was done here for the secondary. That can be true. It can be true that just because someone shows you one side of them in a football sense or in a locker room sense doesn't mean they're the same person at home and aren't capable of revealing a different side of them that's heinous and reprehensible. That can be true. A third thing can be true. None of us know what happened with Cam Sutton, and
that's where I'm at,
and the alleged victim in this case. So, but we do know that so one of the facts is that he was on the run for so long, and or not on the run, but at least wasn't turning himself in. Couldn't be found. So, I mean, that's one point to consider in all of this. Again, that wasn't something, that's something he could have, in theory, addressed. But, obviously there's legal proceedings playing out and league discipline playing out. So I'm sure he was instructed by his defender to not get into that in the media. So, yeah, I mean, obviously you just hope the Steelers did their due diligence here, not just with Cam, but with law enforcement, and, read all of the same, disgraceful police reports that we have read. And you hope they got all sides of the story and got as close as they could to the truth before making this decision.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting when you go back and you get to the part. Cam Sutton, like you said, didn't want to talk about the case at all. And he said, like, hey, guys, I'm not going to talk about this and everything. But the one thing that he did say was asked, what about the fans and how they might interpret it? And he said, quote, I'm never worried about the narrative. I'm never worried about what necessarily people say, because obviously, more than likely, they don't know me more than anybody else. And it gets back to your foundation, your morals, who you are individually as a human being, and just what you stand on. He didn't exactly like delve into it. I think the essence of what Cam Sutton was saying is that people don't know what happened here, and I know what happened here. And that's the thing, is that as journalists, we don't know. And that's why we're asking the questions to Cam. Like, we're trying to get answers. What all led to this? Why, the things in the affidavit, how much of that was true? Was it all true? Was none of it true? These are all things that we don't know, because the affidavit alleged some very ugly things that if those things were true, I actually think that, one, Cam Sutton should be behind bars if those things are true, but we don't know if they are. And that's why I think that's where, things are with the Steelers, is that, they probably, when he did turn himself in, they probably looked over the evidence, had some things there. And then that's why it was, we saw it dropped from a felony to a misdemeanor. And that's why he's back in the NFL. And with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And like you said, and like Jason Mackey wrote in his column Wednesday or Thursday morning, you have to hope the Steelers did their homework, because if they didn't, and let's say something else comes out, let's say there's a video, let's say there's something else that comes out about this would get very ugly very fast. And yes, signing him for a vet minimum 1-year deal is like the least impactful thing. It would not destroy them in the least. It's not like they signed him to a $12 million deal or 50, however many millions the Lions paid him last year. It's not like that, but it would be a distraction to the team if something bad were to happen, where more of this exploded at some point.
Yeah, I mean, hey, again, compartmentalize as much as you can in these situations. From a football standpoint, makes all the sense in the world, because they did not have a bona fide slot corner here. And I know there's going to be people saying, why would they take a chance on this guy? He's washed. Look how many yards, touchdowns, passer rating, receptions he gave up last year. It's a little different. I mean, he was cast as an outside guy after signing that big deal with Detroit. Maybe that's not his bread and butter, at least at this stage of his career, but maybe he can still be very impactful as an inside corner for the Steelers. So, I mean, you just kind of put that over here. You get why the Steelers did it. I mean, Mike Tomlin has loved Cam Sutton since he always tells the story of going back to his pro day at Tennessee, having dinner with him, that night or the night before or whatever. And they've always thought very highly of his football IQ, of his character. So those are, difficult, vibes to get away from, I guess. But, I know there's also been a lot of criticism from fans looking at this on social media, watching Cam Sutton's responses to us in that scrum on Wednesday. I mean, I'll say this much as far as the actual substance of his answers. Cam is a guy who talks in circles a lot, even if you're asking him about, why did you guys give up that 10-yard touchdown pass? Or where do you think that the Steelers are going to use you this year? He kind of talks in circles. He says a lot without always making sense. So, I mean, you extrapolate that to the most difficult, circumstance that any athlete would have to deal with when people start asking about your personal life and legal troubles. And yeah, he's probably going to go around in circles even more. So I'll just put that out there as context for how he sounded, if nobody had ever seen a Cam Sutton interview or watched him speak much in the last few years. I mean, maybe that means nothing, but it's just kind of further context for why some people were taking umbrage with certain specific words he may have used, and even just the overall message of whether he seemed contrite or not. And hey, again, reminding everybody that the affidavit is awful. We also weren't there and don't know exactly what happened. And if he feels like he was in the right, or at least not completely in the wrong in whatever went on with him and the victim, then of course he's going to view it that way and explain his side of things that way.
Absolutely. And again, to reiterate your point about how Cameron Sutton talks, and this is not a slight on him. When my first year in the Steelers locker room was 2017, and I was still figuring out how to interview players at lockers and, the decorum of how all this worked. And Cameron Sutton was like one of the first guys, and it was his rookie year too. But he was one of the first guys who I could ask tough football questions too, and he'd give me straight answers, and he would, like you said, he would over explain things. He would say he would go say something, kind of go over, give you more details, and then
one question would be a 2-minute answer, right?
Exactly. And it would be something that was more like a 30-second answer, but he'd give me 2 minutes and hey, great. And then, but again, I think that's part of why so many people in Pittsburgh, and you and I said this before when it initially happened, that's why I was shocked that I saw Cameron Sutton's name attached to this, because Cameron Sutton was always the nicest person in the locker room to me. But again, you can't infer how good of a person is in their private life just because you interview them in their at their job. So there's a lot of there. That's not to say his innocence or his guilt, because again, we do not know. All we know is what the court has given us as far as that information. But I want to talk to you, Brian, about how Cameron Sutton could impact this team, as well as how he could impact the guy who's arguably the best. No, maybe not arguably the best player in the secondary, and that's Minkah Fitzpatrick, who also spoke on Wednesday. We'll get to that here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. But first, I want to remind you the show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When I say they have over 500 different available beers, I want you to think about that. Over 500 different available beers, and they're all different flavors. There's 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, with all the amazing breweries that we have in Western Pennsylvania, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap, and they're always switching new ones in and out. So every time you go there, you can try different stouts, different IPAs, different summer beers, different winter beers, whatever your flavor is. You can find it at Mike's Beer Bar, with the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. And also, they have over 20 televisions. So whether you want to catch, the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals, WNBA, or the Pirates when they're on the road, it's a great place to be. And it's also a great place to be before, during, and after Pirates games themselves. It's Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. They also have amazing steak on a stone for a great dinner. Go there today. They're the best bar in Pittsburgh. When you get there, tell them Chris sent you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko, talking about what we saw this week at OTAs. Stemming off of the Cam Sutton situation, Cam Sutton's return gives the Steelers a versatile cornerback, if nothing else. And like you said, his numbers last year with the Lions weren't just not great. They were bad. He gave up 8 touchdowns, a passer rating allowed of 122.6 or something like that. And that's a major jump up from the 69.6 passer rating allowed last year with the Steelers, when he had 3 interceptions, 8 passes broken up. I think he only had a few touchdowns allowed. He was that's where I think that people are wondering, is he washed? Is something different? Brian, I think that part of the thing here is that Cam Sutton was never supposed to be a number 1 cornerback. That he was supposed to be the flexible guy that could take on the number 2, jump to the slot, help as an extra safety on the field at times. That's always been the role that he's been best at. And when the Lions paid him the money they paid him, they were hoping he would turn into the team's ace corner that could shut down star wide receivers. And he could do it at times in certain situations, but asking him to have to do it every single play, I think that was the folly there. And I also think that's why on the field, he could be still an asset for the Steelers secondary.
Yeah, he could. I mean, that's always been, the best thing that he's brought to the table for them. I mean, he's been a playmaker too. I mean, generally one of those guys, the ball comes his way, he catches it. But yeah, I mean, he's a port in a storm right now for the slot corner position. We know that they let Chandon Sullivan walk. They cut Patrick Peterson. They didn't really look into any of the big name free agents at that spot. They didn't even draft one, Chris, which they tend to not do. They tend to overlook that position in the draft, as we talked about in April. They did sign Beanie Bishop as an undrafted free agent, and I like what I've seen from him. I know you have too, but there's a big difference between someone who's never done it at this level, also played outside corner in college at West Virginia. And somebody like Sutton, who not only has he done it in the NFL, but he's done it in this organization, in this defensive scheme with Terrell Austin. And the only thing that's really changed a lot is most of his secondary teammates have cycled through even over 2 years. Really, the only guys, I guess, that he's played with would be Minkah Fitzpatrick and DeMonte KZ. You could count Miles Killebrew in that group, but we know he doesn't play much on defense. So a lot of change for the other faces, but for Cameron Sutton, it should be a pretty seamless transition to getting back to what he was doing before he went to the Lions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're right. It's funny. I forgot that KZ was here for 2 years. I forgot that last year was his second year with the team. But Minkah Fitzpatrick was one of those only guys. And I do think that Minkah Fitzpatrick might be one of the most people that benefits from getting a Cameron Sutton, and partially because, and you and I have talked about this before, is I don't think Minkah Fitzpatrick's best role is playing everywhere in the defense the way that Troy Polamalu did and the way that Minkah Fitzpatrick was asked to do last year. And when I asked him about that, and you can watch that video on Post-Gazette Sports, we have the whole YouTube scrum there, and I asked him this question in that video. But when I asked him that, I said, like, what has to be done to help you get back to leading the league in interceptions like you did in 2022 versus what happened in 2023? And he was like, hey, they just got to let me be me. We got to play Minkah ball. And when I tried to ask him, hey, what's Minkah ball? And he was like, come on, man. Like, he didn't want to get into the specifics. And Minkah Fitzpatrick is one of the funniest guys because he will make a reference to like the style of defense and things like that. And when I was like, what do you mean by that? He'll always be like, come on, man. I ain't telling you the plays. And I'm like, I'm not asking for the plays, but what's going to help you do this? And I think he's inferring what you and I are kind of reading between the lines about. They got Patrick Queen. They drafted a Payton Wilson. So now you have two guys that are better at covering as linebackers than you had since Ryan Shazier, maybe as far as you go back, maybe rookie Devin Bush. But then you've added Donte Jackson, so you have a faster, younger cornerback than Patrick Peterson. And now with Cameron Sutton, you add a slot guy. So now you've filled a lot, and also DeShon Elliott, who also can play in the box and also fill those other strong safety roles. You've now filled all those extra roles that Minkah Fitzpatrick played last year, which, at least in our opinion, played into why he wasn't the interception machine that he had been for most of his career. I think that's Minkah ball, and I think that the additions that Omar Khan is making on defense are all about getting him back to being that role.
Yeah, and plus some of the issues at linebacker over the past couple of years. I mean, he's had to come flying up from that safety spot and record 100 some tackles, and that doesn't really speak highly of your defense. And I also don't think there are many safeties out there who want to be in the triple digits in tackles. They'd rather be making plays on the ball in the air. So, I mean, it's kind of a two-way street. I remember early in his Steelers tenure, he was very adamant that he was most comfortable back in the post, playing the deep third of the field. And that might be the analytical guy in him thinking, hey, how do you get paid in this league? Interception, PBUs, not being a jack of all trades, but being a master of one is pretty helpful to get the big money. And he did. And since then, I think the Steelers, either by necessity or by, natural tinkering and seeing Minkah's skill set, have tried to move him around a little bit more, take advantage of his own versatility. But man, I think he's, the last year, the proof's in the pudding with the numbers for him, and numbers for safeties, really any DB when it comes to picks and stuff. They're kind of circumstantial, that they're not always indicative of whether you had a good year or not. Sometimes guys have a bunch of picks, but we're also getting burned a lot. Sometimes guys have very little production on the ball because quarterbacks just weren't looking their way, whether they're a corner or a safety. But I also just don't think 2023 was a very good year for Minkah beyond the injuries. He did come back for the playoff game. I'm not sure if he was 100%. He's not somebody who's going to make excuses about the knee, but let's just keep it 100, Chris. He was terrible in that game. The Bills missed tackles. It almost looked like he been giving it his all on some of those Josh Allen breakaways and Khalil Shakir breakaways. So, I mean, that was a brutal game for much of the Steelers defense, but especially as you finished off last segment by saying the guy who's supposed to be the best player in their secondary. So he needs a bounce back season. And, I'm sure the coaches are trying to figure out the best way to put him in position for that. But what's the one thing that Minkah is known for above all else? His football IQ, his football acumen, essentially being another coach on the field. So, and there was the play last year when he was on the sideline where he supposedly put a bug in Terrell Austin's ear about, hey, maybe we should switch up this coverage here based on what they're doing. So
it was louder than a bug. I'll say you that.
Yeah. So he is as savvy a football player as you'll find. And he's going to have his own opinions on how he should be used to be best for himself, but more so even the team.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a guy who in training camp, even in OTAs, when he's done with his first team reps and when they're doing team stuff and he's playing safety, he won't go to the sideline and get water. He'll stand like 30 yards back, watch the next team. He'll just take a knee, take his helmet off, and he'll just be there with Terrell Austin, and he'll just go over like, okay, this is what's happening here. This is what's happening there. I fully expect Minkah Fitzpatrick, when he's done playing in the NFL, to coach somewhere, because this guy thinks
he dislikes the media too much, I think. That
is a point.
He has really hated talking to us in recent years for whatever reason.
I'm going to talk about just how the scrum started on Wednesday, because it was.
Keep in mind, he has not done any he had not done any interviews, I believe, in OTAs. To this point, so.
He had to. We'd asked him, or he really is. One thing Minkah Fitzpatrick always does, and credit to him for his craftsmanship, his devotion to his craft. But he stays on the field after practices for long periods of time, and in doing so, he often does so until our time is up that we're allowed to be around the locker room or to ask players, and then he comes in. Now, that does not mean that he directly wants to avoid us, but it's certainly, when it happens every single day, we have to ask, when are we going to talk to Minkah Fitzpatrick? So Wednesday, when we got the chance, we said, hey, can we get a minute of Minkah's time? Minkah comes over. He's like, well, I really only have 30 seconds. And our colleague Jerry Dulac was like, well, maybe like 90 seconds. Minkah Fitzpatrick looked him dead in his face, and he said, that's longer than a minute. And I was like, dang, Minkah. Like,
that just goes to show how much he's not really trying to talk to the mics. Every once in a while, he might seek out a reporter, maybe if he's got something to say. And we know that he's got strong feelings about what it takes to be a Steeler and protecting that logo and wanting to win. Every guy who comes from Alabama, for the most part, I think, really wants to win and has the desire to prepare to win. So you never question that about Minkah. But yeah, he's just hasn't exactly been an open book over these last couple of years.
Yeah, and listen, that's not a detriment to his character or anything, but that's what it is. It is just, it was funny when we
all
got
business, all ball for the most part. And guys don't have to talk during OTAs either if they don't want
Very
to.
True.
It's I mean, Najee Harris, we haven't heard from him since his 5th-year option's been declined. Maybe next week at mandatory minicamp as a little plug or tease for what we might have on this on the docket.
Absolutely. He's Brian Batko. I'm Chris Carter. This is the North Shore Drive podcast. We also are going to talk some Pirates in a bit here, so stay tuned for the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll be right back. Friday here in the North Shore Drive podcast, and we turn to the Pittsburgh Pirates, who pulled 2 out of 3 against the Dodgers this week and looked kind of impressive in doing so. To talk about that, we've got our Pittsburgh Pirates beat reporter, Noah Hiles, on the show again. Noah, when we were talking about this series going into the week, we were talking about some really big pitching matchups. You had Jared Jones and Paul Skenes coming in, and both of them delivered with big wins. We talked about the 1-0 win on our Wednesday show, but that Skenes game was pretty wild on Wednesday. I think it was one of the biggest highlight games I think the Pirates have had all season.
Yeah, especially the first 2 at bats against Ohtani. I've talked to a lot of people about this. Baseball is a sport where you only get, elite pitcher versus elite batter matchup. You only get that 4 times a game, sometimes 3, depending on how long the pitcher goes. And very rarely do you get a game where both sides deliver. If this is basketball and it's LeBron, Kobe, both of them are going to get enough opportunities to do something memorable. If it's football and it's, Deion Sanders versus Jerry Rice, both of them are going to get enough opportunities. But in baseball, it's such a small sample size when it's batter versus pitcher. But both of these guys got to showcase their greatness. In the first at bat, Paul Skenes says, forget my splinker, forget the slider, forget the changeup, forget the curve. I've got 3 things for you. They're all 101, and I dare you to hit them. And he went right after the best hitter on the planet and made him look like a little leaguer. It was incredible. So what happens the second time around? He goes right back after him, and twice more. Ohtani swings and misses. He watches 3 balls outside the zone. It's 3-2. everyone watching in the park, out of the park, all throughout the world knew what pitch was coming. He said, Shohei, I've thrown it to you 5 times now. You've whiffed 5 times. I dare you to hit it. He said, I dare you to throw it. He did. Ohtani put it off the back wall in center field. Just an absolute showcase of 2 of baseball's greatest talents. And that's, like I said earlier this week, I will always geek out about great baseball. That was great baseball. And that was just a small portion of that game. You had Aroldis Chapman throwing 104. David Bednar looked the best we've seen him all season with his velocity. I think he only needed 8 pitches to retire the Dodgers to get through that final frame there. A 7-run inning against James Paxton. I mean, it was just an overall really good baseball game for the Pittsburgh Pirates. There were some lulls there. Obviously, the bullpen allowed some runs. But I mean, to take 2 of 3 from the Dodgers, to take the first 2 and to get those wins with your rookie arms on the mound, if that is not a sign to fans that, listen, there is frustration with Ben Cherington, no doubt about it. The hitting prospects have not been developed as well as you would hope with Davis and Sawinski and all of these guys. But there is a future here. There is something that if you did not watch those first 2 games and think, this could be something. You don't know how good because you need to surround it, but there is a little bit of a core here, and it could be something special in the years to come.
What is it that allows the Pirates to just have success against the Dodgers? It's the weirdest. Is it 9 in the last 15 or 10 in the last 15?
It's something like that. I think it was like 11 of the last 16. Maybe it's 11 of the last 17. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know they're the only team to beat them at that. They're the only team to have that amount of success against the Dodgers in the last 3 seasons, to where I think they've won every single series where they played them. I don't know what it is. I think maybe it's the Dodgers. I think coming west to east is never easy. I mean, they talk about that in football too, traveling to the East Coast. But I mean, it's baseball. You do that a lot. I think maybe part of it might be just in recent years, especially, the Dodgers probably were like, hey, we can maybe coast on this one compared to, when they're in this area, they're probably going to play some New York teams or or Philly or someone else. This might be, a trap series for them. I think the key for this one, though, is in the common flaw for this Dodgers lineup, and it's hard to find one, obviously, is this team does not hit well against high velocity. And they saw the 2 fastest starting pitchers in baseball in their first 2 games. And you saw the struggles with them. And I would even argue that had that 7-run inning not gone as long, Skenes probably has a better outing. But and obviously that's not an excuse. Like, you have to be able to stay locked in. But as a rookie, that's challenging. But I think that long inning kind of threw Skenes off his rhythm and allowed the Dodgers to kind of get a little bit of a piece of him there. But overall, yeah, I think they struggle to hit velocity. That's been the book on them all year. I think that's why they hit Bailey Falter better last night, is because he does not throw 100 miles an hour. And they were kind of just waiting to see someone who didn't. And but yeah, I think that was the story behind Pittsburgh's success this time around against the Dodgers.
So the Pirates have, before this series been kind of been up and down. I mean, they're still there, winning 2 out of 3, but now they're 29-33. They're early 4 games back of 500. They're right in the playoff race.
Yep.
What do you think that they have to do the most to pull out the next couple, to kind of take that step up in the next couple series? They got one more series at home against the Twins, and then they're back on the road against the Cardinals and the Rockies.
I think the bullpen has its work cut out for itself. I think that we've seen better stuff from the bullpen, excluding yesterday. I mean, and again, yesterday was really just Ben Heller getting absolutely shelled. But you look, Chapman, I think, has looked better in the last week. Bednar is back to his old self. Holderman is good. Hunter Stratton hasn't been great, but we've seen the ups and downs with him. Majinski and Nicholas are kind of coming along, I would say. So, but it's going to have its work cut out for itself this week, because Saturday, it's looking like it's going to be a bullpen day. I don't know who they would call up to start from the minor leagues with Herman and Ashcraft pitching yesterday. I don't think there's a guy you can just pluck out of nowhere to come pitch. So, and if it is, it's going to be an opener. So you're already looking at 1 day of prolonged bullpen efforts. Now, the good news is Mitch Keller pitches today. So they're probably not going to need a lot of bullpen arms today because Mitch Keller always goes deep. But after that, Saturday, your bullpen's going to be tested. Sunday, Jared Jones needs to deliver a quality outing. And then you go on the road, and these are big games. You have a series against St. Louis, a team that's right next to you in the division. You have 3 very winnable games in Colorado after that. You have to keep winning series right now because the bats are coming along. Nick Gonzalez is hitting among the best of all baseball players right now, and especially National League infielders. And then you look at other guys, they're coming through with runners on base. It's the lineup's producing, the starting rotation's doing its thing. It's really going to come down to the bullpen, and can it hang on to leads that I think will be there in these next 9 or so games. And if it can, this team should probably notch at least 5 or 6 wins. But if the bullpen can't hang on and do its part of the job, especially in this upcoming series, if the bullpen sets itself up poorly and you get one guy who's supposed to pitch a whole inning and comes in and can't even do his job, and then you have to burn extra arms because of it, it could set up a catastrophe for the short road ahead, and it could cause a lot of problems. So it's going to come down to bullpen pitching.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense there. You brought up Nick Gonzalez. I wanted to ask you, between him and some of the other guys that have come up and performed, how have you seen the Pirates guys who are coming up from them, guys like Henry Davis, guys like Jack Sawinski? Have you seen any improvement from them as a group? Is it really just Nick Gonzalez that's kind of leading that right now?
I think it's too early to talk about Davis and Sawinski. They've only played 3 games. I will say, Jack has had, I think, maybe a little bit better of an approach. He's still striking out a lot. Henry, I haven't noticed a ton of difference, but again, very small sample size here for both of them. But yeah, I mean, Nick Gonzalez is a completely different player. And I think that this is a guy who the changes he's made from last year are visible and they're leading to production. This was a guy who battled for the starting spot in spring training, lost that battle, and they said, look, you're definitely good enough to be a big leaguer now, but we want to send you down to AAA so you can get consistent at bats, keep working on these things. And Derek Shelton said, normally when he tells someone they're going to AAA, that's where the conversation ends. Nick Gonzalez had like 3 or 4 questions ready to go. What do you want me to work on? What should I be doing while I was down there? He took all the advice. He took all the coaching. He was the best hitter in AAA during his time down there. He came up, and he's been the best hitter on the Pirates since then. What he's doing right now, he's on a pace, Chris, if he were to have played the whole major league season, to drive in 140 runs. That would be unbelievable. And I don't know if he'll be able to maintain that pace, but just having that bat in the middle of the order, where you think back to April, there were so many games where the Pirates were able to draw walks, get infield hits, get runners on, and not bring these guys home. They have a guy that can do that now. And because of that focus that he brings from opposing pitching staffs, it's creating opportunities for other guys throughout the lineup as well. So with Nick Gonzalez, he's been the difference maker. The swing's a little different. The approach is way more aggressive, and the results are showing. So he's been the key. You need to get other guys going. Sawinski, Davis, O'Neal Cruz, that's an optimistic ending for him yesterday with the 3-run home run. Brian Hayes has been better since returning from the IL. If those guys can continue to deliver, the offense is going to do its part. The starting pitching is going to do its part. And like I said, the bullpen's just got to hold its end of the bargain.
We will see if indeed they do. Again, 3 home games this weekend against the Twins. Then they're on the road for the Cardinals and the Rockies. Then back on in mid-June at home with the Reds. Got a lot of important games as the Pirates try to stay in the playoff race. To read all about that, follow our guys, Noah Hiles, Andrew Destin, the Pittsburgh Pirates beat writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Noah, thank you so much for joining us. Big shout out to Brian Batko for joining us as well. Thanks for everyone for tuning into the North Shore podcast this weekend. We'll see you Monday as we get ready for Steelers mini camp, and we see what the Buccos did throughout their weekend, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.